Okay, so before we leave, you remember last time we had I had defined both the primary pollutants as well as the secondary pollutants. So if you will recall in the table, just at the end of that table, I don't want to switch back and forth between the PPT and this news item. There were also these volatile organic compounds. So do you recall? It is one of the 6 primary pollutants which I had
Yes,
projected
ma'am.
on the slide. Okay, all right. So now, in that list, in the volatile organic carbons, volatile organic carbon matter, benzene is listed. Collectively, these compounds are called as BTX, where B stands for benzene, T for toluene, and X is for xylene. Now, recently, this article, which I'm just projecting in front of you, is from Chemical and Engineering News. You see C and EN, that is Chemical and Engineering News, which is one of the most respected and trusted journals in the chemical society. Okay, and they just published an article on December 30th, 2021, just to inform the people that benzene seems to be everywhere. And so far we have not paid too much attention to it, but it is an ingredient which seems to be every the list of compounds which they have put in, like hand sanitizers, for example, or spray sunblock, sun aftercare lotions, and many of the other commonly used things like deos, for example, which everybody uses, antiperspirant sprays, dry shampoos, conditioner sprays, etc. So it says that these are all products which are found to contain benzene over the last year. Okay, because today, through analytical techniques, you're also able to detect very, very low quantities of these. Earlier, the kind of instruments which we were dealing with in order to sense the presence of these organic solvents, which were like parts per billion. But today we are able to detect extremely low levels of these compounds also. So benzene, for example, seems to be everywhere, and there is a zero tolerance. When you look at, for example, of course, benzene is found in petroleum and more. It's here. It carries the normal aspects, breathing difficulty, etc. You're not able to breathe properly, and it also affects the central nervous system, resulting in depression, so on and so forth. And so therefore one has to be very aware that what are the things which one has to be looking at, and many of the things which were not earlier detected are coming to light, and people have to be very aware of how much of these things should be used. All of them, they do carry the risk of being exposed. So now let me just go back to the PPT. Okay, just give me a minute. So I think so just give me a minute, okay? Because I think that lecture is off here. So I'm just going to put it for you. I'll see if I have already put it. This is where we had left. Can you see the slide?
No, ma'am, we can see that that news article.
On. This is what we were discussing last time.
No, ma'am, we on a
Yes or
screen
no?
that news article is there. No, ma'am.
Article is still appearing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. I see. So just give me a minute, go back and try to upload it again. So yeah, just give me a minute. So has it come back?
Not yet.
I see. I see. Just wait for a minute.
Perhaps
If
now
my
it can
internet
be.
is a little bad today, so let me know when you begin to see this slide. So can you see this secondary pollutants on the slide?
Ma'am, not yet. Perhaps you have shared, but we are not able to see because of internet connectivity. Now we can see.
Yeah, could be. Okay, okay. Yes, so I'm going to put it in this mode. And if you are, you have difficulty, because if I go into the full screen mode, then sometimes when I change, it doesn't get very quickly to you. So that was our list of the primary pollutants where we ended with the volatile organic compounds. And now here is a list of the secondary pollutants which I had started to talk about last time. And in this series, I had just discussed about ozone. And so that's it. So as an example of a secondary pollutant, I had discussed about ozone, which is of concern because too much of ozone in the air, which forms as a consequence of chemical reactions between nitric oxide, volatile organic compounds, and the solar radiation, particularly which are coming into the sun's atmosphere. These are all responsible for formation of ozone, and that is a pollutant. It's an eye irritant, and it also has a lot of, in terms of affecting the human body and the human system. There are a lot of studies which indicate that it's extremely harmful for the body. Okay, so after the air pollution, I'm going to switch over to water pollution. So what do we really mean by water pollution, and at what level do we consider that water is going to be contaminated? Water pollution is the presence of either some kind of a chemical, physical, or a biological component, or any other factor which produces a condition of impairment. That is, the water has gone bad to a level with respect to some particular usage. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Because whether the water is going to be used as a potable water, that is for drinking purpose, or whether it is for agricultural practices, or whether it is for domestic usage, etc., will also determine what is the level of contamination that can be tolerated in water. So the kind of limits which you are going to set up for the presence of a chemical in the drinking water, which is also called as a potable water, is going to be very different from what is going to be used for agricultural practices. So that is the reason why there is a need for us to make this kind of a distinction. So no uniform criteria can be applied. And the level of contamination which is necessary to render a water body impaired is highly dependent on the type of water body. Okay, so by types of water bodies, I'm going to mention in a while as to what do we mean by that. So where that water body is, and where is it located, and what is the kind of a function, what is the kind of a service that it is going to provide. That is whether you will use it again for drinking purpose or just for agricultural purposes, etc. For instance, a water which is deemed unfit for drinking by humans could be suitable for other uses, such as habitat, irrigation, or recreation purpose, like water fountains, etc., which are in a park, which only have a decorative function, can tolerate much higher levels of contaminant. Okay, so that is the reason why there is no hard and fast level, and it will depend on the type of water body that we are dealing with. So when you say the type of a water body, Either it could be the surface water or it could be the groundwaters. Okay, what do we mean by surface waters? These are water bodies like lakes, for example, or reservoirs like tanks, etc., ponds, rivers, and streams, which all have their own dynamics, and they are exposed to both the underlying terrestrial surfaces and the atmosphere. Okay, so if you take pond, for example, so it is very easy for pond to be contaminated by the level of pollutants which are in the air. And at the same time, it is also exposed to what is happening just beneath the surface, which could be actually the groundwater. Okay, so I hope you're able to understand the difference. So these are all the surface water bodies. However, when you talk about the groundwater, and this groundwater usually exists in porous rock material, which is just below the Earth's surface. And it could be in contact with surface water, or it may be relatively isolated. And eventually, it could still be contaminated because it may not be affected by air pollution, for example. But if there are gasoline storage, in those kind of storage tanks, then the groundwater is likely to be contaminated. Okay, and this groundwater, for example, is not localized because it permeates through Earth's lower surfaces, and it could be, the lake could be only, let us say, spread over 4 or 5 kilometers, or maybe 1 kilometer. So that contamination is going to be very much localized, restricted to that lake. Okay. On the other hand, if there is a groundwater contamination, then it could spread over many, many kilometers. So in distances which could be very far away from where actual contamination has occurred. Okay, so you could see an effect of if there is a petroleum leakage which is coming from underground storage tanks or certain other things, if it enters into the groundwater, that could be seen in communities which are very, very far away from there. Okay, so that is something which is to be kept in mind. So is this clear as to how air pollution is going to be different? So is this point clear to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
all
ma'am.
right. All right. So again, very briefly, I will just let you know, just like we discussed about what is the source of air pollution, we talked about industries, we talked about the chemistries which are happening in the atmosphere, aerosol chemistry. Similarly, if you look at the source of water pollution, I had projected on slide 2 that there are both point sources as well as non-point sources. And the point sources are generally the industrial wastes, which make up for 15%, and the domestic wastes, which contain organic matter, which is coming from the food things and other things, or coming from the toilets and all that. So that is all organic matter, which is very rich in carbon and nitrogen. So these are our sources of water pollution. Now, then we quickly move to what is called as a soil pollution. And so in soil pollution, obviously, if you have toxic chemicals, which are either pollutants or which are contaminants in the soil, if these are in concentrations which are high enough to pose a health hazard, then it will be called as a soil pollution. Okay, because soil obviously is extremely complex, and it contains naturally, a lot of aromatic compounds. For example, if the trees are keep falling, or fruits, for example, there are exudates which are coming out in the soil, but then they are kept at a concentration which are well maintained in the soil. But if the level of many of these organic compound is going to reach to a certain level where it can impact human health, then it'll it'll be classified as or having that soil as being polluted. So that's what it tries to say. And generally, when you talk about soil pollution, unlike the air or unlike the water pollution, it is usually localized to certain geographical regions. Okay, because air spreads very easily with wind, air gets blown away and it can carry all of these pollutants. Similarly, water also gets transported, but the soil pollution is more or less localized. So what is the reason for the soil getting polluted? Here are some of the activities which are listed. Now, so these are classified under 5 headings. One, soil gets contaminated because of industrial activity. So either there is a manufacturing manufacturing activity which is coming from chemical or electronic industries or whatever, power industries, etc., or because of mining activities. Okay, so under, of course, mining, there are a lot of chemicals as well as metals, etc. So I'm going to project to you eventually that when you take a stock of what all are the pollutants, what kind of pollutants are we going to be dealing with? Or soil pollution, etc., we are going to examine later on. Okay, there are just as many only chemical compounds which you have to deal with. So eventually, when you talk about developing a biotechnological route for remediating this, you have to understand what kind of molecules are you dealing with, and based on what groups of bacteria or what groups of fungi or maybe even plants, they have a kind of a biochemistry which will allow you to break down these pollutants. Okay, so that is the reason why we need to understand what kind of chemicals, what kind of pollutants are we dealing with. So amount of industrial activity, that is manufacturing, mining industry, or because of agricultural activities which are going on all over the world. Agriculture, farm produce is extremely important. So these are chemicals like fertilizers and pesticides. And these chemicals are not produced naturally in nature, but these are man-made. Okay, and plants, they absorb many of these pesticides, and when they decompose, they cause soil pollution. Since all of these, as the plants fall down, for example, many of them could be harvested, but many are left behind in the soil. Okay, the fruits are taken, or you have, for example, all the vegetables, etc., their fruits are removed, and eventually the rest of the crop, etc., is left in the soil. So if they aren't, all those contaminants to return back to the soil. So that also becomes a positive. Okay, the waste disposal. As you know, the domestic wastes which are collected from the households, they are usually, but the solid wastes are usually taken to landfills. So everybody knows, the Ghazipur area or Timarpur area, they have huge landfills. And from there, many of these things over a period of time, they keep leaching out. They ferment, toxic compounds are produced, toxic gases like methane or nitric oxide, or many of these other gases are also released as a result of biological activity or weathering, so on and so forth. So waste disposal is another agent. Similarly, accidental oil spills. Oil leaks can happen during the storage and transport of oil. These also enter into the groundwater, and they are responsible for causing soil pollution. Acid rain, for example. Now, when pollutants present in the air, they mix up with the rain or with the moisture, they create nitric acid or they create sulfuric acid. And eventually the acid droplets will fall. Just as they fall on the land, they will also fall on the water bodies, and therefore they cause contamination of water bodies. Okay, so is this clear as to what causes soil pollution?
Just
So any questions
Yes,
on
ma'am.
this?
one doubt.
Yeah,
Ma'am, can you just go to
yeah, yeah.
the definition of soil pollution? Basically, I just
Okay.
forgot that because the water pollution
I
was the initial part.
Okay. See, anytime, like we say in the first sentence here, that the presence of toxic chemicals, which could be either a pollutant or a contaminant in the soil in high enough concentrations. Okay. We're not trying to say, because soils are very, very diverse because of microbial activity and also because of natural, it's not that it is only the man-made activities, but because of weather conditions, because of volcanic eruptions, because of so many natural activities, there are certain compounds, minerals, which are constantly being put into the soil. Okay, soil which is adjacent to water bodies or whatever. But if these are in concentrations which are very high, in order to pose a risk to human health or the ecosystem, then only we will say that the soils are polluted.
Yes, ma'am, I got it.
Hazard. You go to a Okay, so where the, I mean, you go to, for example, villages, or you go to places where there is very little industrial activity, the soils there, they do contain many of these hydrocarbons or what have you, but then they are not present in large enough quantities. So you will not say that there is soil pollution there. So that is the difference which we need to understand. Okay, so now the source of soil pollution I have already listed with you. Now, in this particular slide, I hope you can read the font. Maybe for this slide, I'll go to the full screen mode. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So now, in this picture, for example, the purpose is to show you that many of these chemicals, they get transported through different ecosystems because of natural activities. So something which is a resident in the air, or something which is a resident in the soil or in the water body, for example, because in ecosystem, all of these are connected to each other. So it doesn't matter. It could be a chemical which is present in the air, or it could be a toxicant which is present in the water body, for example. But sooner or later, it will enter into a biological system, and it will find its way into the humans. Okay, so just to give you an illustration, for example, here to explain that point. So you have, for example, in the industry, we have particles and you have vapors, the gases, nitric oxides, or many other small particles, etc., which are emitted from an industry. Okay, both in the air, and it could also be through the effluents which are being released. All right. So these vapors, etc., the toxic vapors, the gases, etc., they can be taken up by the leaves in a tree, like you see here, for example. Okay. And at the same time, they could also be taken by the plant roots, like it says here, uptake by plants and soil. In the soil, there are a lot of these invertebrates, small animals. So many of these toxic compounds which are released in the effluents which are emerging out, they can be taken up by the plant roots, they can be taken up by the soil invertebrates. Okay, you know, vertebrates and invertebrates, okay, you will recall from your high school biology that anybody which has a spine, like you have mammals, you have birds, you have amphibians, they are all called as vertebrates. But those that do not have a backbone are called as invertebrates. Like you have crabs and so many other small nematodes, worms, etc., insects which are in the soil, they will be all called as invertebrates because they don't have a backbone. Okay, so now they can be taken up by them. All right, and then the plants are going to, for example, through air, of course, they get like sulfur dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, etc. They can get dispersed, they combine with the water vapor, and in the form of acid rain or whatever, it falls back into the water bodies, like you see here. Okay, so let's start from here. So these are plants, and once they are dispersed, all of it is going to return back into the soil. All right, and many of these invertebrates are going to be eaten up by these birds, etc. All right, and they also enter into many of these invertebrates, small insects can enter into water bodies where they are eaten up by the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, the fish, and eventually people will eat fish, and they can be taken up by these animals which are goat, etc., which are going to graze on the land, and people who are meat eaters, they will enter them through either the fish or they will enter it through the animals. Okay, so therefore you cannot think that the chemicals are really, just because it is in the air, it will not be, it will not enter into the food chain, or if it is in the water body, how is it going to affect me? Apart from coming through drinking sources, that is the potable water, it also enters into the food chain, and it transfers itself into the aquatic food web, uptake by aquatic plants, by grazers, by animals, so on and so forth. Okay, so that is something which is to be understood, that all of these are related through food chain, and eventually they do enter into humans. Okay, so now I have switched my slide. Is this visible? The next slide now on biomagnification.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now the other thing, it is all right for it to enter into the food chain, but what is also happening at every time is a phenomenon which is called as biomagnification. That is in parts per million. If it is present in a certain level at a primary producer level, so here is the trophic structure which I'm going to show to you in the ecosystem. So we have a producer, which were, our phytoplanktons, our algae, etc. And we have consumers, we have the secondary consumers, the tertiary consumers. So every time these contaminants, they move through this food chain, they also get magnified in terms of how much they are present in one particular system. Okay, because remember that a fish, okay, which feeds on these algae, etc., is going to eat a lot of it. All right. And unlike many of the other nutrients, like if they take, the carbon or the agarose, which is in here in the food material, for example, it gets recycled, it gets metabolized very quickly. But then if there is a contaminant like DDT, for example, I'm giving you a case of DDT. So DDT, you remember, it is used extensively. We used to call it as flit, and it was essentially sprayed in order to kill the mosquitoes. Okay, so the structure of DDT is shown to you here. It is dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, DDT, and it gets partially metabolized also to these two derivatives, which are called as dichloro-diphenyl dichloroethane, and same thing but dichloroethylene. So the bond which you see here is an ethylene bond compared to what you have here. So these are also the predominant metabolites of DDT. Okay, but what started to happen was that it starts to get bioaccumulated. So if in the primary producer it is present at a level of 0.04 ppm, which is parts per million, or translated to the metric units, it is milligram per liter. Okay, so ppm is the same as milligram per liter. So it is present at 0.04 ppm. But then when you move to the primary consumer level, because it starts to get accumulated in the body, it doesn't get excreted as well as the carbon compounds, get excreted as a part of carbon dioxide. Nitrogen will come out in the form of urea, so on and so forth. Okay, so they keep on building up in the body. So for example, in the primary consumer, the level is now so many folds higher. It's 0.23 ppm. When you move to the next trophic level, it is tenfold more accumulated. It is 2.07 ppm. When you look at the birds, it is accumulated to 13.8 ppm. Okay, so that is called as biomagnification. And as a result of which, you can imagine that if there are animals which are feeding on birds, or people who are feeding, or if you take fish which is contaminated, the levels of these contaminants is highly accumulated in them. So biomagnification of DDT, in other words. So, and also part of the reason is that many of these hydrophobic chemicals, they build up in the food chain because they are not metabolized as rapidly. They get accumulated inside the body, and the differences among organisms in their metabolic rates, in their diet, in their dietary assimilation efficiency, leads to getting these contaminants accumulated. DDT is resistant to degradation by organisms excreted more slowly. And then worldwide, of course, I don't know whether I have it in the next picture. So DDT, by and large, so what was the effect? It was known to be an endocrine. Endocrine means any kind of a hormone disrupting chemical, which was also associated with breast cancer for a long time. All right. In the Western countries, DDT is already banned. It is not to be used as an insecticide. However, WHO, the World Health Organization, still allows DDT to be countries in India or in Africa continent, because there is a constant menace by mosquitoes. Malaria is predominant, and this seemed to be very effective in killing mosquitoes. Okay, so only under WHO supervision DDT is allowed to be used, but otherwise it's a banned chemical. Okay, so do you understand what is the concept of biomagnification?
Ma'am, just one doubt, ma'am. Why it is accumulated when we are going from primary to tertiary? It is keeps on increasing and accumulating in the consumers. I mean, I
You see,
didn't.
one thing is of right, because normally you see if you take these algae, for example, the algae are taken by the primary consumers in the water bodies. All right, now what is algae composed of? It is all a biological material. It is going to be having, what does it contain? It contains protein, it contains carbohydrates, it can contain agarose, and it contains sugars, it contains lipids, fats, etc. So when you move to a primary consumer level, they have all the necessary enzymes in order to metabolize these nutrients. There are only as many, like agarose, etc. It is very rich in galactose, sugar, or galactan, which is a polymer of galactose. So all of these biochemical pathways, they will exist at this level in order to metabolize. So if an organic matter which contains carbon, it contains sulfur, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So all of these, whatever is present as a biopolymer or as a biological entity, gets metabolized by the metabolic pathways which are existing here. However, DDT, it just keeps sitting there because it has to break down DDT. All right. So it starts to get accumulated inside the body. And per unit at every trophic level, the primary consumer is going to eat a lot more of this. And similarly, when you look at the secondary consumer, okay, so it is in order to survive, it is going to eat, so 10 fish it is going to eat in order to survive. The birds which are the tertiary consumers, the food intake is going to be much larger compared to what a small fish is going to eat. And that is the reason why the primary consumer, so DDT, which doesn't get metabolized at all, so if it is going to eat 10 fish, the idea here is to show that 10 times as much food it has taken up, containing 0.23 ppm, and it starts to just get accumulated inside its body. So now it has become 13.8 ppm, or per body weight, per kilogram body weight, or whatever you want to say. It starts to get accumulated. Okay, simply because there are no metabolic pathways inside these organisms to break down DDT. So they keep on getting accumulated. They don't get recycled in the body. What you consume gets recycled. If you are going to take protein as a diet, you take carbohydrates as a diet, everything gets finally oxidized to carbon dioxide and water. Nitrogen will go away, all right, and everything gets recycled in the body. So does it explain as to what do we mean by biomagnification?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, but the thing is that like we can like like this DDT can enter inside the cell. So the way it can enter inside the cell, why it can't get out of the cell? So that there will be no biomagnification.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Like, just read the last line here. Okay. So DDT is very resistant to degradation by organisms, including humans, if it gets into our food, and it gets excreted more slowly than the nutrients that are passed up the food chain. And why does it get excreted also less? Is because it is not water soluble. It is hydrophobic in nature. And things have to, how are you going to pass eventually? It has to be, many of these compounds have to be water soluble also to get passed out. So they keep on accumulating these structures. These are hydrophobic, so they keep on getting accumulated in the biological membranes, which are lipids. And that is the reason why their excretion is much slower. So no excretion, only it keeps on getting accumulated, it doesn't get metabolized also. And that is the reason why biomagnification occurs. So it has to do with both metabolism, ability of an organism to metabolize these compounds, and how water soluble they are going to be. Okay, so is that point clear to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
So these are the reasons. So can we move
Yes,
forward?
ma'am.
Can we move forward now? Okay, so in the next slide here, I hope you can see it. Now, collectively, irrespective of whether we talk about the air or the water pollution or the soil pollution, all of these contaminants or pollutants, so to speak, we are going to categorize them into several categories. And how does it help us? Because eventually any kind of a biotechnological intervention which you are going to be providing will be based on what kind of compounds are really in the environment. What do I need to, what kind of microbes do I need to look for? What kind of technologies do I need to develop? Because what are the compounds which I'm going to be dealing with? Okay, so these are contaminants are therefore into this, which are basically these organic. There are a lot of these inorganic like nitric oxide and things like that, but I'm not going to discuss about that because they are mostly gases, etc. We will come back to them a little bit later. But the list here is the list of organic chemical pollutants. Okay, because biological systems can fix up organic compounds, or they can metabolize organic compounds. So we can find a solution for removal of these using biological systems. So they are categorized as pesticides, herbicides, and you will see that the difference. By pesticide, what we mean is that you are going to kill insects which are going to affect the crops, because farm produce agricultural practices is something which is worldwide and everybody needs to eat. Everybody needs to eat fruits and vegetables. Even the meat eaters, they have vegetables and fruits as a part of their diet. So you need to remove these insects which are called as pests. Herbicides. Now in any crop, for example, many of our, if you see the kind of food which we eat, okay, is going to be either wheat, or it is going to be corn, or it is going to be rice. Rice and wheat are the staple crops. Okay, and all of these are monocots, so to speak. Their seeds have only one cotyledon. Okay, and what you will see that in the fields, herbs are very, very small plants. And if they will contaminate the field, they are very rapidly growing. Like, on a lawn of grass, you must have seen sometimes that there are very small plants which will spread very rapidly. They are called as the herbs. These are very small plants which will usually occur with grasses. Okay, and if that grass is either in your lawn, or if it is the grass, because your wheat crops and your rice crops, they are also tall grasses. Basically, they're all monocots, they are tall grasses. If that land gets taken away by these herbs, all the nutrients, all the fertilizers which you are adding to the land, if it gets taken up by these herbs, which are also plants, then no nutrients are going to be left to support the agricultural crops. So herbicides have been developed which selectively target the dicots, which are the herbs, and they will leave these rice crop or wheat crop or the corn crops, sugarcane, etc. They will leave them alone. So herbicides will act on the stem of food crops. Is that clear to everybody?
Ma'am, your voice was breaking, so we
Yes,
can't
ma'am.
able to hear from that part when you say that the dicots, the ups.
Because
Yes,
I mean, just to illustrate, am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am. Now you're audible.
yes, ma'am.
Is my voice
It's like it's breaking
okay?
like
Now, if I switch back to this, I don't know whether it's going to be any better. So am I better? Am I audible right now?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so very quickly, the example which I was giving you about herbs is that dicots are, you have seen the normal dal, or you have seen a mutter grain. If you look at mutter, you can break it open into two parts which are exactly identical. Or rajma bean,
Yes,
they
ma'am. Yes.
have two identical parts. Okay, or even arhar ki dal, what we see is only one. But I think mother would be a great example to take for that. So when you open it right in the middle, you will see two identical halves. Those are cotyledons. Okay, that is where the growing embryo before a full plant comes. When matter when it undergoes the germination process, the food which is stored in the cotyledons is taken. Okay, but since they have two of those, they are called as dicots. Di means two, and cot means cotyledons. Whereas if you take a wheat, आपने इसका गेहूं गेहूं आपने देखा है, चावल का दाना आपने देखा है. Okay, these are called as monocots. They only have one cotyledon and they grow as grasses. तो जो भी ये फूड क्रॉप्स आप देखोगे, वेदर इट इज अ व्हीट क्रॉप, वेदर इट इज अ राइस क्रॉप, ये ना घास की तरह ग्रो करती है. अनलाइक जो आपने बाकी देखे होंगे प्लांट्स वगैरह, एनीवेयर इन द फील्ड. एनीवे, नाउ टू गो बैक टू द पॉइंट is that in these monocotyledon, which is rice and wheat crops, for example, they grow as tall grasses. उसमें ये जो herbs हैं, which are okay, they are targeted through herbicides so that they don't steal the nutrients from the monocots, which are the rice and the wheat crops. So you have to understand what is the difference between a pesticide and an herbicide. So this controls the pests, and herbicides will control the small plants which are growing as a contaminating this thing, a plant. Small plants which will grow along with them, and they will steal all the nutrients. So is that point clear to everybody now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then, so through agricultural practices, these are everywhere, and you can't stop because food has to be grown. Pesticides have to be used. Pesticides have to be used in order to protect your crops. No food. Okay. So similarly, industrial chemicals is another category of these contaminants, and I will give you specific examples in each category, or compounds which are derived from energy production and other combustion processes. Like, for example, when fuel is burnt, when coal is burnt, then there are incomplete products of combustion which are normally released into the air. So they are also the contaminants which you are dealing with. Metals and metalloids, nutrients, radioactive compounds, and bacteria. Okay, so by and large, when you try to look at the list of these contaminants, we are trying to talk about these categories. And many of these, as the point just below it shows, that many of these are hydrophobic in nature. They tend to bioaccumulate and they move up the food chain. So from each category, I will give you an example so that when we come back to look at what kind of microbes are going to be required, you will know what are our expectations from those microbes. What should they be able to do if we want to use them as a source of bioremediation. So pesticide, DDT is an example which I already gave you. DDT is a pesticide. Apart from acting on the mosquitoes, it was also used for, it was used as, what does it do with the calcium metabolism in birds? And therefore, it causes the eggshells to become much thinner. Okay, so when you spray them, and the birds which are normally in nature, they are going to be exposed because on which you have sprayed DDT, then they would lay the eggs which would have very thin eggshells, as a result of which they would not really be able to complete their incubation, and the numbers, they started to come down. There was an impact on the numbers, and there is complete devastation of the bald eagle population on one of the islands in the US. So bald eagle is one of the very predominant eagles, and eagles are extremely important because they are sitting right on the top of the pyramid tertiary consumer. They generally feed on the secondary consumers and keep their numbers in check. Otherwise, there will be just too many of the secondary consumers. Okay, so the eagles, they also keep their numbers in check. So this entire population was wiped out because of this particular problem. Okay, so as a result of which the DDT has been banned in most of the countries. And as I told you earlier, that a few countries, they still use DDT for malaria control under the supervision of World Health Organization by WHO. And like it says here, because of its hydrophobicity, DDT can bind to suspended particles and molecules in water, and it can also be transported far away. The hydrophobic nature allows it to bioaccumulate in the organisms. Okay, so it doesn't get solubilized, it stays in the biological membranes, and that is how it gets bioaccumulated. So that is our example of a pesticide. And then I have a list here of, so maybe, I'm going to switch to the full PPT version here. So can you see this slide, the herbicides?
Yes, ma'am. Right.
Yeah.
Visible.
Okay. Okay, so now, this is the second category of contaminant which I had discussed with you. So herbicide, as the name suggests, are those which are able to kill these herbs, which are small plants. And essentially there are three different categories, and except for glyphosate, which is actually, it can be solubilized in the aqueous material, both of these are hydrophobic in nature. So we will begin with atrazine, like you see here, for example. It's a widely used herbicide. It's applied in the cornfields and in the sugarcane fields. And a part of it, in very small concentration, it is also applied on golf courses and residential lawns. Because, golf courses, you have seen, they maintain a very, very smooth grass, and there are kind of plant. Okay, so all of these dicot, which are really even contaminants of laws of lawns, or etc., they have to be kept away. So there are chemicals which are applied in order to keep them in that state. Okay, but as a result of this, what happens, that it results in groundwater contamination. So over a period of time, it enters into the water bodies which are just below it. It passes through them, different layers of soil, and it contaminates the groundwaters. Okay, and there are many, many, and they get transported over large distances. So tumors, breast, ovarian, uterine cancers, as well as leukemia and lymphoma, they were all linked to the usage of atrazine. So it also blocks photosynthesis in microorganisms. Okay, so you can understand that although it is still widely applied, because corn is a very big crop, or sugarcane, both these are sugar crops, and sugar is a huge industry. Sugar is either available from sugarcane, Western countries, particularly in the US, in India and in tropical countries, sugar is derived from sugarcane, but in the Western hemisphere, sugar is derived from corn. So these are very, very important sugar crops. So we still don't have a biotechnological route for it, and it continues to be applied as atrazine is still being applied, very widely used. So the second category is that of glyphosate, like you see here, and it is a widely used herbicide. It is an organophosphate, and it has a carbon, this thing here, although it's not aromatic, but certainly aliphatic. So we say it is an organophosphate, and it kills the plants by interfering with the synthesis of aromatic amino acids. Okay, now why do we say it kills the plants? Because it is a herbicide, so it is interfering with the plant metabolism. And that it does, it just gets accumulated, because you see, if you look at this particular part of glyphosate, it resembles the amino acid glycine. You have an NH2 here, COOH. This is the asymmetric carbon. This is that, this C alpha, there is an H which is attached to it. So this structure resembles that of glycine amino acid. And then it has a phosphate right here. So it gets readily incorporated into the amino acid biosynthetic pathway, and particularly it interferes with the synthesis of aromatic amino acids. And it gets absorbed to soil. It can be broken down by the soil microbes to another derivative, aminomethyl phosphonic acid. Okay, and it is extensively present in the water samples. So World Health Organization, or WHO, labeled it as a probable carcinogen, but probably not by a mutagenic mechanism. That is, there are cancer causing chemicals, but all of them, they don't necessarily cause mutations in the DNA. So cancer can be caused by so many other mechanisms other than mutations. That's what we mean here. So you have to link it to what you read in microbial genetics. Okay. So in mammals, this glyphosate's mechanism of toxicity is believed to be by uncoupling of oxidative phosphorylations. All right. Now there are adjuvants, including surfactants. They are also added to glyphosate in the commercial herbicide products, which enhances its bioavailability and the potential for acute toxicity, etc. So, so in other words, we are trying to look at here something which is very widely used herbicide, but at the same time, there is no getting away with it right now because, because these are all food crops, etc. And and they have their own toxicity here. Then here is an example of another herbicide which is called as paraquat, and again, it is a herbicide and it can lead to acute respiratory distress syndrome. And NIH, there was a study which was supported, which indicated that it also leads to early onset of Parkinson's disease via mitochondrial dysfunction and oxidative stress. Okay, so you see how many of the herbicides, we don't have any way around them, but they do get into the atmosphere and they are responsible for causing these. So is this, are the contents of the slide clear to everybody here?
Ma'am, the uncoupling of oxidative phosphorylation, that means the oxidative
Yes.
phosphorylation do not take place, and that's why the toxicity is there in mammals.
Right, right. You remember, if you will recall, the mitochondrial respiratory chain, by uncoupling, what we mean is that, there used to be one of the, what was a dinitrophenol or something, which is also an uncoupler. And that means that electron transport will continue to occur through the mitochondrial chain, but it is not linked to phosphorylation. ATP formation does not occur. That is oxidative. Uncoupling means that oxidation will occur. The movement of electrons is going to occur through the various cytochromes, which are a part of the mitochondrial respiratory chain. Electrons will flow from one complex to another, but then it is not linked to formation of ATP, and that is called as uncoupling. And any agent such as dinitrophenol is one of the uncouplers. They are respiratory poisons, because eventually, it leads to death of a person, because obviously when you can't generate ATP, very shortly, the system runs out of energy, and all our activities are dependent on constant availability of ATP. So those are respiratory poisons. Is that point clear to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And now I move to what we call as industrial chemicals and polybrominated biphenyls. All right. So here is a structure to allow you to look at it very quickly. So these are like, it's a typical phenyl ring, like you see right here in both the cases, except that all these, and it is a biphenyl ring. And all of these are substituted by either chlorines, or it could be substituted by bromine, in which case the compounds are called as polychlorinated biphenyl or polybrominated biphenyls. Okay, so now let's see, what kind of industries are making them and why are they making them. So these polychlorinated biphenyls were first produced as an industrial chemical, and they were primarily used as dielectric fluids in capacitors and transformers. Okay, I hope everybody knows what is a dielectric fluid. You have done your
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
e-courses. So can somebody tell me, I think Ratnesh, can you just tell it to the entire class in your own language? What is a dielectric fluid?
Ma'am, I guess like dielectric fluid is a fluid which which has a high dielectric constant.
Yeah, and it doesn't allow electrons to flow very quickly through it. So it's somewhat a fluid which can act as an insulator.
Yes, ma'am. then the charge goes on decreasing on capacitor, like Q to Q is
Absolutely.
1 minus 1 by K. That is the form I can say in
Exactly.
that mathematics.
Exactly. So PCBs were actually made with that purpose, okay? Because they were being used as dielectric fluids in capacitors and transformers also. You have the same thing. You are trying to change one kind of an energy into another kind of an energy, and they were used as fluids in there. So you know these had a lot of importance. These had a lot of importance, and so PCBs were industrially very important. At the same time, they are also used as plasticizers in the plastic industry, and they were first produced by Monsanto and sold under the trade name Arrow Color. And then there was a recent study that is about almost 10-15 years ago that they found that all these PCBs can bind to estrogen receptor sites. Okay, because you know there are only, for example, there are only a set of cells which have the receptor which can bind to estrogen or to other hormones in the body. But then if these start to bind, that means there are going to be reactions which will be triggered in those cells, which would have been triggered only if estrogen or if that hormone was going to bind to the receptor, which is displayed on the cell surface, then only that action downstream would have occurred. But since it was able to bind to estrogen receptors, then they will induce some kind of an hormonal activity which would interfere with the normal biochemical processes. Okay, so is that point clear as to how it can be, how it can cause malfunction of a human body? Because they can bind to estrogen receptors.
Ma'am, can you explain it again? Like, what is estrogen? I don't know.
Estrogen, estrogen is a female hormone. Okay, and this is something which starts to cause ovulation, etc. And there is a, and you know all the other features which are associated with women, they are actually because of the hormone estrogen, but they are always secreted in very defined quantities. But then, and they are present in both males as well as in females. It is just that they are kept in check by the natural hormones, because there is a certain level of hormones which is maintained in the body by the circulating hormones. Okay, now imagine, and why? Because there is only a certain set of cells which are going to respond to the presence of estrogen in the blood. And why do these cells respond to the presence of estrogen? It is because they have receptors on their surfaces. Okay, so receptors are nothing but protein molecules which are displayed on the cell surface, which will bind to a hormone, and then downstream of that, it is going to cause, like for example, a kidney cell, you know, or a liver cell, for example. You know, why is it only a liver? Because it only carries out some specific set of functions, and that is regulated through hormones, and that is regulated through certain other biomolecules which are circulating in the blood. Okay, so if any undefined molecule enters into ovarian cells, like the cells of the ovary, for example, they respond to the presence of estrogen, and there is ovulation every month. But if there is something else which starts to induce the same kind of a response as estrogen does, then you will see that there is going to be an irregularity, and so many other responses are going to be displayed by the body, which normally would not occur. Okay, so does it make sense? Have you been able to relate it?
Yes, ma'am. Now I can.
Okay, because you see, if there are ovarian cells, or if there are cells which are in the other parts of the body, for example, which respond to a hormone in a very specific manner, but now if PCB binds to an estrogen receptor, then downstream in that particular cell, because the receptors are all localized on the cell surface, they will induce the same kind of a response as estrogen would have, which is not desirable. So excessive hormonal activity, and it can also cause haywire of the biochemistry of the cells. And excess of these hormonal activities are also linked to cancer. All right. So as a result of which, for example, it began to be understood that they are not good for humans. Similarly, you see here polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which are actually polybrominated. They don't have chlorine, they have bromine. They were used extensively as flame retardants in plastics, in electronic devices such as computers and TV, in the polyurethane foam furniture, padding, mattresses, etc. So it was a flame retardant. And like many of these others, flame retardant materials, they were also hydrophobic. These are POPs are like persistent organic pollutants. So collectively, many of these organic materials which are hydrophobic in nature, they are all classified as persistent organic pollutant. Okay, so the PBDEs, they are also hydrophobic. They tend to bioaccumulate in microorganisms. They have been distributed globally by long-range atmospheric transport. They are found in the lipids of aquatic organisms such as salmon. It has also been detected in the milk of cows and humans. Okay, through the food chain, through whatever. Okay, they do eventually find their way into humans and so on and so forth. So is that point clear to everybody? So what we will do is, should we continue for another 10 minutes, or should we take a break for 5-7 minutes?
Ma'am, we can continue.
We can continue and then we can disperse at 10:46, 10:47. So now let's quickly go to, this was the fourth category in the list of pollutants which I projected, and the fourth category are the kind of molecules which result from incomplete combustion of waste or burning of hydrocarbons. That is, if you were to burn wood for any purpose, or fuel or petrol or diesel, for example, then what are the kind of toxicants which are released in the air? And here is a list of these. These are all aromatic compounds you will see, starting with naphthalene, and this is acynaphthalene, or all of these compounds. You see, all of these are aromatic compounds, and then polychlorinated PCDs are listed here. These are polychlorinated dibenzofuranes, polychlorinated dibenzodioxin, PCDDs, etc. So a range of these aromatic organic volatile compounds are secreted, are discharged into the air. Okay. And all of these are endocrine. By endocrine, what we mean is hormone disrupting chemicals, which have various carcinogenic potencies. So above a certain level, if they get into the human system or into any other animal of the ecosystem, they have the potential to cause cancer. And where are they coming from? They are produced from incomplete combustion of organic matter, materials such as fossil fuels, and polyaromatic hydrocarbons. They also enter the aquatic environment via oil spills and refinery and drilling operations. Okay, and all of these are EPA priority list chemicals. By that, what we mean is that the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the largest body in the world, which resides in the US, they set, for example, they identify that these are the chemicals which we need to first eliminate from our environment. Okay, so when we say priority list, that means these occur under the first list of chemicals which need to be removed from the environment. Now here we are looking at metals and metalloids. So is the slide visible to everybody? This was the first category of pollutants.
Yes, ma'am,
One
slide
of
is
the
visible.
yeah, okay. So, both metals, and everybody knows what is a metalloid. So these are elements like boron and silicon, which have partially metal-like characteristics, and they also have properties which are very similar to non-metals, like boron and silicons. Now, they differ from many organic contaminants as these occur naturally. So it is not necessarily because of man-made activities that metals and metalloids will be in nature, but they are present naturally in the environment. Okay, and if these become enriched in a particular environment due to human activities, such as extraction, mining activities, or maybe they are being used by various industries. Like chromium, for example, is used heavily in batteries or in the paint industries. If they exceed a certain level as per the guidelines which are given, then it becomes a water pollutant. Okay. Now, for example, if you look at arsenic contamination, now most groundwaters in the US, we don't have very contamination. Most groundwater in the US, they naturally exceed what is called as MCL. Okay. Now let me tell you what is an MCL. It is defined here. It is the maximum contaminant level which is admissible in the bodies. Okay, so you see arsenic, for example, is supposed to be only 0.01 milligram per liter. That is the level which is admissible in the water body. But many of the groundwaters, for example, is already known that it exceeds 10 microgram per liter. So although it is still very much within this category, but there is a lot of arsenic which is in the water bodies. So in a similar manner, a large number of these metals or metalloids are listed, which are listed here, like antimony or arsenic, asbestos, cadmium, or chromium, are one of the very big source of the pollutants which we know. And what I would like you to see, read it at your own at time. I don't want to read everything here, but what is the potential health effect from a chronic exposure above the MCL? So if a person is constantly exposed to antimony, for example, which is at the level of 0.006 milligram per liter, okay, that is like 6 ppm level, then by chronic exposure, what we mean is that constantly, either because it's coming in the drinking water or because you're constantly getting exposed to it through inhalation or some other process, then it can cause an increase in the blood cholesterol level, decrease in the blood sugar levels too much, below what is desirable. What is the source of contamination? Discharge from petroleum refineries, discharge from industries which prepare fire retardants, ceramics, electronics, soldering, etc. So all of these are given to you here: asbestos or cadmium or chromium, etc. Okay, so please have a look at it. Now on this slide, another thing which I want you to understand and to be able to differentiate between is what is called as an MCL, which is the maximum contaminant level, okay, which is permissible. And then there is another term which is used, which is maximum containment level goal. Now these are the levels which have been biologically tested, and below this there is no effect on any biological system. And the idea is to keep that maximum contaminant level should be as close to the maximum containment level goal as possible. Okay, because for example, for arsenic, the level should be 0. But then what has been kept admissible, because given the water purification system, given the kind of technologies which we have, we are still not able to remove arsenic completely from our water bodies. So what is permissible as of now, as of January 23rd in the water bodies, is that you can be at 0.01 milligram per liter level. Okay, but the goal is always kept a little bit higher. So it allows for a margin of safety. Okay, so this is, these are all which are given to you and which will allow you to understand that constantly, where are you getting exposed to cadmium from? So corrosion of galvanized pipes, discharge from the metal refineries, a runoff from the waste batteries and paints, etc. From the soils, you have a runoff water, which are bringing all of this into the drinking water at very small levels. So humans are getting exposed to these. Now, many of the metals which are listed here are transition metals, such as cadmium and copper. They could be heavy metals, such as lead and silver, all of which are prone to forming complexes with organic or inorganic ligands. So is this slide, are the contents clear to everybody?
Ma'am, Yes, ma'am. The contents are clear, ma'am. But I have a doubt, ma'am. The endocrine word is chemical. It is the disruption of the cells, as you
Hormones.
said.
No, no.
Okay.
By
Okay.
endocrine disrupting, that means, in a human body or in any, there are hormones. So, the pituitary, which is your brain, secretes hormones. Okay. All your gonads, your organs, they secrete hormones. And kidneys, on top of it, kidneys, you have adrenal glands, and they also secrete hormones. Thyroid is a gland which secretes thyroxine. So all of these are endocrines, basically. Okay. Where people try to understand only about hormones, in what levels they are secreted in the, and incidentally, you have to know that just as urology, cardiology, anesthesiology are specializations of a doctor, similarly there are doctors who are called as endocrinologists, and they only specialize in knowing hormones. They have done their MD in only studying hormones, how different hormones are secreted and how these are balanced in the body. So when somebody suffers from diabetes, or when somebody has thyroid, you usually refer to an endocrinologist. So they can tell you what should be your food so that you can balance your insulin in the body. So when you say endocrine disrupting, that means hormones are imbalanced in the body of a person if they are exposed to these kind of contaminants.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So is that clear?
Understood.
So when you say disrupting, that means the hormones, it could be any hormone. It could be a thyroid, it could be estrogen, or it could be adrenal, which causes hyperblood. When you say blood cholesterol is increasing, that is controlled by some other hormone. So there could be disruption of hormones. So this is something which I would want that you just read it yourself, because metal toxicity changes as it moves in different ecosystems. Now, certain metals, I will only give you one example, and I will request you to read other three columns here. Now, chloride ions, for example, the concentration of chloride ion, it increases as you move from freshwater bodies to saline bodies. Okay, so chloride ion concentration is very, very low, for example, in freshwater ecosystem, like in lakes and ponds. But when you move to a marine ecosystem, then the concentration of chlorine builds up in the seawater to, for example, zero point 0.6 moles per liter. Under those conditions, it can complex with many other organic matter, which is in the marine environment. Okay, so the properties of a pollutant, in other words, just to cite you an example, that a metal which is a pollutant, okay, could be quite all right in the fresh water, but as it moves into a different ecosystem, it could become a molecule of concern. So please read. There are some other examples given of chromium, of arsenic, etc. So please read them. And so is that clear as to what is meant by this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now, the next slide is the last of that, on the list of 6 pollutants, which I had listed out, is the last categorized under nutrients, under radionuclides. Okay, so as the name suggests, nutrients are when excessive nutrients through domestic sewage, when these are released into the water body. Okay, so for example, excess of nutrients, that you see, this is of Pacific Northwest, so you will recognize this. This is the western coast of the United States. See here, along the Pacific coast, along the Pacific Ocean, is actually a case of eutrophication, where excess of these algae are growing, because of the release of domestic sewage into the water bodies. So what do they really contain? Which causes this, for example, nitrogen, which are you have of nitrogen in the form of nitrates, fertilizers, animal manure, chemical discharge, etc. They bring in excess of nitrogen nitrates, which are released into these water bodies. Similarly, you are releasing and providing too much of phosphorus. Although nitrogen and phosphorus, these are basically nutrients. But then if they are supplied in very large quantities, if they leak out into the water body, the same thing can now become a pollutant. Is that because of this, there is going to be excessive growth of algae along this. Now, what our satellite image of a lake during an algal bloom in 2011. So it is just next to some landmass where the water should have been very, very clear, because you can see now that there is a lot of greenery here. That is because there is excessive algal growth. So about what happens is that $2.4 million lost income by the tribal commerce from 2015 due to closure of fisheries. Now, because of algae, there is a lot of, because they respire very heavily, although they photosynthesize, they release oxygen, but they also release carbon dioxide. So the water which is underneath here becomes depleted in oxygen. Algae also secretes certain toxins. So the water becomes poisonous here and it cannot support the fish life. So there was closure of fisheries. Similarly, about $40 million worth of money was lost from Washington state's loss of tourism from the same fishery closure, because many of these also serve as a point of tourism. There are beaches where people can visit, they can undertake water sports, so on and so forth. But if it becomes contaminated, then tourism is not possible, fishery is not possible. So it leads to economic loss. Okay. Similarly, there is another example here that in August 2014, there was a city which was close to one of the states. It advised its 500,000 residents not to take water from the tap, as the high toxin level had affected the water treatment plant's ability to treat the water to a safe level. And under these conditions, only the bottled water was used, for drinking purposes. So in other words, I think the need to understand is that even nutrients, if they are present in excess concentration, can cause such a problem. Then radionuclides, which are the radioactive elements which are released from nuclear reactors, mining, medical wastes, because people undergo radiotherapy sometimes. So they are given this during just as you have chemotherapy for control of cancer, there is also radiotherapy, okay, which releases a lot of these radioactively labeled compounds, or atmospheric deposition from the nuclear bomb testing, etc. All of these can lead to release of radioactive elements, which is also a contaminant. And then enteric bacteria. So this enteric bacteria, for example, because this is a fecal indicator bacteria. Okay, so that means that these coliform bacteria like E. coli, for example, they occur in the intestines of warm blood animals. In the large intestine, E. coli is present. And their presence is pollution. So if you have untreated water, which is or untreated this from the rural areas or whatever, when it gets into the water bodies, all right, then you will see that there will be large number of coliform bacteria. It is an indicator that such kind of human activities are occurring in those water bodies, and everything is discharged without being treated. So coliform bacteria, therefore, are an indicator for fecal pollution. So is this? Should we move to the next slide?
What is the meaning of EBA?
Where is it?
In the second point,
read?
EPA drinking water MCA.
Yeah, yeah. See, EPA, you must, all of you understand, it is the Environment Protection Agency. In the first lecture itself, I had told you that, all of these standards are set by a world recognized body. And as far as the environment is concerned, the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. US for what should be the level of contaminants which can be discharged, because based on the extensive medical testing which they have already done. So EPA, FDA, you will always hear about these terms. FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. Again, it is a very large US body which sets up a global standards for how much of, you add preservatives to the foods, but how much of a preservative has to be monosodium glutamate or some other preservative. When it is added to a food item, what should be the level of that is going to be decided, or the standards are set by FDA. Similarly, the pollutant levels are set by the Environmental Protection Agency, which is a US body. MCL, I had already contaminant level, or the maximum contaminant
Yes,
level, which is permissible. Okay, so these are the terms, which are expected to be understood, and they are just common sense terms. These are not considered technical terms anymore. When everybody says, FDA must give a approval for this particular vaccine, people are supposed to know what is an FDA. Why is FDA license required for a vaccine to be made available to the public? Because they undertake trials of these things. They have a huge data set. They have done the testing at every level, so on and so forth, and on the basis of that they are going to set the guidelines. So now, I think before we close this particular chapter, here is something on algal toxins, which I brought up in the last slide, that what kind of toxins are secreted if there is excessive algal growth, like you see here. There is a dog which is floating through algal,
Ma'am, we
this in the
cannot
water
hear.
body, this is a red algal bloom, and similarly you see along the coastline, for example, all the green. Can you see it in this form?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So very quickly, so therefore, because of this algae growth, not only do they minimize the fish or some other industry, okay, sense. All of these are what I have already listed, that they cause algal bloom, and cyanobacteria, which are actually blue-green algae, they produce toxins which are called as cyanotoxins. Okay, and these are hepatotoxins. What we mean is that they cause injury to the liver. And other cyanotoxins are neurotoxins. That is, they can also affect brain, they can cause respiratory paralysis, etc. And they interfere with the normal. Is why? Because the electrical transmission along the nerve cells doesn't happen properly in the presence of these toxins. So we say it can cause paralysis. Okay, so it is just to give you an example that anytime when you approach a water body and you see all of this greenery there, that's not a good sign. That shows that the water body is not fit. People should not go for swimming in these water bodies, or they should not try to do any water sports around these, because there are a lot of these toxins to which people can get exposed. Okay, so therefore
Ma'am,
the
this
idea is that
ma'am, these toxins
yeah,
are proteins or other metabolites. uh, Can be other
uh,
metabolites also.
well, they are, many of them are small peptides. Like you see here, in the under the fifth bullet, you will see that the cyanotoxins, the most widespread type are peptides. So these are small amino acids, chain of small amino acids, which are called as microcystins, etc., and which is one of the most prominent cyanotoxins, which are released by the cyanobacteria. These are small peptides, water soluble, they can easily enter into the biological system. Okay, with
Okay,
this
ma'am.
we close our discussion can be the source of pollution, because by now you must have an overview of where all the pollution occurs and what kind of chemical compounds am I going to be dealing with. If I want to develop a biotechnological route to remediating, to removal of these, you have to know what kind of molecules are you dealing with. So in this lecture you will have had an overview of what are the kind of pollutants which I'm going to be dealing with. Okay, so I hope that point becomes clear and you're able to get an overview of this. Okay, so we close here. Yeah, the last up to the last lecture I have already uploaded, and the reading
Yes,
material I
ma'am.
will also try to do. And please let me know if you have any questions.